Hi, I'm Brian at Mr. Maple.
And I'm Matt at Mr. Maple. And today we have an update to one of our more popular videos. You know, we often get asked, hey, why didn't you talk about this winter interest tree or this tree? Well, don't worry, with over 1,000 varieties of Japanese maples, we're going to continue to put out some more content. So today we have winter interest Japanese maples part 2.
And don't forget to sign up for our weekly emails. We've got the 10 at 10 every Tuesday. And also make sure you like and subscribe our channel. That way you get notified every time we put out a new video.
Hi, I'm Tim Nichols, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. On today's episode of Winter Interest Part 2, we're going to talk about a large assortment of winter interest Japanese maples. These are Japanese maples that not only give interest during the spring and the summer, but they have some nice bark interest that gives them something unique during the winter.
Yeah, we've put together a small collection here of some of our favorite winter interest Japanese maples, and definitely check out our part 1 to this. We have a part 1 to this video. We're going to do some ongoing series on Mr. Maple, so you can definitely check those out. But today we have part 2 of winter interest Japanese maples, and I think it's a fun collection of assorted bark interest types.
And we're going to start out today with Acer palmatum winter flame. This is a smaller coral bark. So many of you are familiar with the traditional sengukaku. This is a more dwarf selection that'll get about 6 to 7 feet in 10 years. So it's definitely going to be much smaller with a more compact habit.
Now, winter flame is popular for having extremely bright red bark. It is one of the more striking winter interest ones. It's a very, very bold red. Now, that foliage is excellent as well. It's going to be a lush green in the early spring, kind of getting to more of a Kelly green midsummer, and then some really nice golden yellows with accents of red in the fall. So great changes on that, but the bark is really what we love about this one. That's why it's in that winter interest collection. In the winter months, this is one that's going to really turn on the lights for just that bright, bright red stemming.
Now, one thing that's unique about winter flame is that the new growth will actually be a little twisted, which helps stand it apart from some of the other dwarfs like Little Sango and Akikawa Hime. So it's one that you can easily distinguish because of that extra twisting in the foliage.
Yeah, I think it gives it a little something extra texture-wise for sure, especially when you're looking at a nice sized plant. You know, we've had one in the ground a couple years, and when it's still at that size where you're kind of standing over it at a 4-foot tall plant or so, and you're looking into it, it just has a little something extra because of that twisting. The texture gives it just something extra that I think makes it extra interesting. Beautiful plant all around, and a little bit of uniqueness there for the foliage for sure.
And winter flame is an excellent tree for anybody who loves that coral bark Japanese maple but doesn't have the room for a tree that's going to get, 10, 12 feet in 10 years. This one, much smaller at that 6 to 7 foot size, fits in a lot of smaller spaces, and is also great for containers.
Yeah, it's a very durable one for container gardening. Now, you've heard us say this almost in every single video, but we love to reiterate it. When putting it into the container garden, make sure you have good drainage on your container. Japanese maples do great in containers, but they just need really good drainage. You don't want boggy or wet feet going on. You don't want that dreaded the water catcher rim under your container. That's a poor way to grow it for sure. You want that drainage going extremely well, and that's just going to increase the life of the plant and really make it a better plant for the container. Now, this is a great choice for that container garden because of that smaller overall stature. So next up on our list, we have Acer palmatum gold digger. Now, it's a fun name and a fun plant. We love this one. We actually named it. We do a lot of garden talks and speaking around. We were actually speaking at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and a gentleman said, I have a really cool tree in my yard. Now, his name was Laddie Munger, and we said, we'll come check that out. It might have even been a year or two later before we got out there, and we went and checked out his plant, and he had a very old seedling he was growing there, and we just love the characteristics of this. So we got it, grafted it, and evaluated it, and then what we do in our evaluation process is we compare it to everything out there. So what we do is we name the 5 closest trees to something, and then we kind of compare it to that when we're going to name something. And if it keeps those characteristics and what we like about it, after about 7 years, we'll get into the trade. And that's what we did with this one. We contacted Laddie and said we're going to put the name Gold Digger on this and move forward. And I think it's been one that people have really enjoyed. It's been kind of a hit for all the uniqueness that it brings to the winter interest style full Japanese maples.
Now, one thing I really liked about this plant is he said, you got to come check out this yellow bark. And we went to go check it out, and in deep, deep shade, it definitely had some yellow bark. But what we liked about it is when you give it a little bit of sunlight, you get more of those peaches and yellows infused with some oranges, and even some brighter oranges going into the fall on the bark itself.
Yeah, it's a really unique bark. Even in, like, I would say as soon as winter starts, it even confuses some people because it almost looks more coral barked as it gets like right into the first part of winter. So the bark changes throughout the year a good bit. It's really interesting. One thing I love about this tree is the spring foliage. I think it's just really exceptional for that. This one will have a pink border to it in the early spring, often a pink flushing over the whole plant. Some seasons it'll be almost a little bit more orangey, but it's really a nice pink when it starts out. And I just think it's a unique characteristic to this one. It gives it a nice flush. It's gonna have that kind of blushing of pink over top of that like light green coloration. And it's just something extra. I mean, I think it makes it stand out as far as winter interest types. And it's one of my favorite characteristics about this one.
Yeah, and then it goes to a darker green when it matures to the leaf, which is definitely a darker green than a lot of the other coral bark types. And then in the fall, it can range from yellows, oranges, and even get some reds in it in the fall color. And for a winter interest type, we're pretty excited about Gold Digger, and I think this is a great addition to our Area 51 collection of plants. In our last video on winter interest Japanese maples, do check that out. We talked about Acer palmatum sangukaku, the original, the OG coral bark Japanese maple. We mentioned earlier that winter flame is a dwarf version of that. Well, if you think about sangukaku being the very large selection of that, winter flame being one of the more dwarf selections of that, Beni Kawa is that middle ground. It makes a nice medium-sized tree with that bright red bark.
Yeah, this is a great mid-size one. We typically list it at around 10 to 12 foot, even in 10 years, where sangukaku typically exceeds that a good bit. Now, Beni Kawa is another interesting name. Beni, you've heard us say in some of our other previous videos, typically refers to red, and then Kawa meaning bark, so red bark. So it's gonna have that light red bark. And this is a great one for that mid-sized tree. It's gonna go out there and perform very well for you. It's a pretty heat tolerant tree. Now, one thing that's nice about the sangukakus are they're very sand tolerant as well. The coral bark types, I should say, are very sand tolerant as well.
Yeah, and a neat thing about Beni Kawa that differentiates it from sangukaku is that Beni Kawa will really give a nice bark interest even in deep shade. Where sangukaku, you really need to give it some more sunlight to peak those bark interest reds on sangukaku. Beni Kawa often does that in the shade, in a shaded greenhouse or in a shaded spot in your landscape and garden.
So Acer palmatum Beni Kawa is going to have some classic color changes for a coral bark type. This tree is going to leaf out in the spring a very lush green. It's an excellent kind of a lime green color during that stage. Now during the summer months, that's going to emerge to more of a Kelly green. So you're going to get that more full green during that part of the season. And the fall color is super exceptional as well. The fall color, you're going to get more of that golden yellow, which I think is really underrated. Some of the coral barks have some of the best yellow fall color out there. So if you're looking for a fall color Japanese maple, sometimes the coral barks are a great way to go. It's not often what they're thought of because they have that 4 seasons of interest, but that fall color is quite exceptional for the Beni Kawa.
And then after they drop their leaves, of course, their coral bark displays all winter long. And it even continues into part of the spring and most of the summer. It's something that really gives an exceptional interest throughout the entire year. It's one of the reasons why I love winter interest Japanese maples, and specifically Beni Kawa, is because of that bright red bark on a good mid-sized tree.
So a lot of winter interest types are actually going to be at their peak in those winter months. So those bark is going to be the most exuberant during the winter months. During the cooler months, the sap's not as high in the plant and the colors just get better the whole winter. So it's something you're really going to enjoy. Going into the spring, they're still holding a good bit of that color. During the summer months, they can actually get a little muted. They're actually at their highest level of growth and photosynthesis during that time. And so the colors get a little bit more muted on the bark, but you're going to get right back into that next stage. As it gets cooler and more into the winter months again, you'll start to see those barks brighten up again and really get to that, what we love about them, that peak winter interest part of the season. So next up in our assortment of winter interest Japanese maples, we have a fun green bark type. This is Acer palmatum Verkade's Winter Gold. Now this selection has a unique style foliage to it that really accentuates and gives something different for that winter interest style bark. This tree actually has a more Matsumure style leaf with that more elongated foliage, which makes a really unique setting for this plant.
Now, one thing that's neat about this plant is it actually grows a little bit wider than it does tall, typically reaching about 8 feet by about 10 feet in width in 15 years. I really like this plant because that green bark, if you just get the right light hitting on it, just really can shine and stand out, and it has almost a glowing effect of green under the right light conditions. And that's really where this tree gets its name of Verkade's Winter Gold.
Yeah, I love this tree a lot in the early spring. You know, the bark still really picked up, and then you get that bright chartreuse green foliage, and it just is like such an interesting palette together with the two. And with that elongated leaf, it just gives it a little something extra. Now, it's also going to have a quite exceptional fall color. The fall color is a bright golden yellow on this one. And so it's a little something different. Yeah, a little bit more orangey, actually, true, for sure. As it gets later into the fall, more oranges.
And so you get an exceptional fall color, really large leaf, something very unique and very different from a winter interest. I'd say it's one of the ones that stands out on the leaf and the foliage and the form from any other Japanese maple that's been selected for winter interest at this point.
Yeah, it's a great winter interest plant too. I mean, especially for that green, lime green bark. That's really what you get with this one, is more of a aoyagi style, but then a different style foliage. So you may have saw aoyagi in the last video. We mentioned it being a lime green bark. This one's going to have more of a goldeny lime green bark as well, but then a very different style foliage and a very different overall shape too. So it's going to bring something a little bit different to the garden. So Verkade's Winter Gold makes a great candidate for that winter garden, especially in the container garden. Because of that shape, it's going to be excellent for that small space, and really gives it a fun way to enjoy this one.
Yeah, and if you plant this where morning sun or afternoon sun can really hit that bark in the winter, you really get that glowing effect where it can really just shine at points where it gets its name of winter gold. So we've talked about a lot of different plants that have a lot of different bark interest colors. The next one is the purest form of orange on any coral bark Japanese maple. This is Acer palmatum winter orange.
Yeah, we first got this one from our friend Carl Munn, and Carl actually got this from a Canadian nursery that was growing this one in a little bit colder zone. What really excites us about this plant is its really bright orange bark. I mean, it's distinctly orange amongst Japanese maples, and I think it's one that stands out in that winter garden for sure. I mean, it's giving you some bright orange color.
Yeah, the pure orange color is something that's so bright and vibrant that it stands out and really makes it something very unique and something very different.
Yeah, it's one that's going to go out in the landscape and just pair well with any of your other winter interest plants. It's going to give everything you have in a red twig dogwood, but everything you enjoy about a Japanese maple. So you're going to get that winter interest orange, but you're going to get the 4 seasons interest with this. It's going to be a plant that you're not going to need to be a cutback shrub, because you're going to enjoy it as a taller tree with that spring foliage and that fall foliage as well.
And then coral bark maples provide some great winter interest in the landscape and garden. All the coral barks that we're talking about here are good zones 6 through 9. We have winter gold, which can actually go down to zone 5.
Yeah, that Verkade's Winter Gold, being a Matsumuri and everything, is a little bit more durable for those colder climates. Now, one thing to take into consideration, when we put a Japanese maple into a container, we typically take that down 1 zone in cold tolerance. So if you're going to be in a container, typically just drop that zone down 1 zone colder, and that's typically where you're rated for. That's a good rule of thumb in general with Japanese maples in containers. Now, the winter orange that we got, that actually came to Carl via a Canadian nursery that was in a much colder zone. So we still list that one as a zone 6, but it may be able to push that even further. There still needs to be some testing done there.
And there's a lot to deal with that as well, because a wet zone 6 is very different from a dry zone 5B. And definitely Japanese maples with the coral barks, make sure you have some good drainage. All Japanese maples want good drainage, and it's especially true with the coral bark varieties.
Yeah, I would definitely reiterate that. You don't want them staying wet and soggy during the winter months. You'll get your best bark interest and just best overall health of any Japanese maple, but especially the coral bark types, if they're good, well-drained soil, especially in those winter months. That's when they're showing out, that's when they're at their peak, and you want to make sure they're not staying constantly soggy.
So I'll give you the first pick today, Matt. Out of this group of 5, what's your favorite and why?
I'll let you guess for me. What do you think I'm going to pick?
Well, it's kind of hard, because you're just going to tell me I'm wrong. Whichever one I pick, you're going to tell me I'm wrong.
I'm your brother, so of course I will. What would you think I'll pick out of this grouping?
Well, you'd probably like Gold Digger because we introduced it, but you probably also like the uniqueness of Winter Gold. And then
I was going to pick the Gold Digger.
Okay.
I mean, I was listening to the Kanye song when we named it. We didn't pick out the name for this one, so anything I get the name, I'm kind of partial to. I mean, yeah, it's a fun plant. I think what really draws me into this one, as far as it being a favorite, would be the spring foliage. That part of it, just, I think it's really cool looking. Like, it's just a real jagged pink on the outside of the foliage, especially. Sometimes the whole thing has a bright blush and a pink. It's just, that catches my eye. I'm a sucker for the flashy ones, and I'd say that's probably the flashier variety. Although you could say that winter orange might be equally as flashy for the color on there. So Tim, out of this group, which one is your favorite?
Well, I do like Gold Digger. We did introduce it, but I'm going to go with Winter Orange. And the reason I'm going with winter orange is because that orange bark is so unreal and so unlike any of the other coral bark selections. It's so vibrant that it always stands out and contrasts so well against so many other plants.
The collector in me waited longer for this one. I saw it and I realized I loved it, and then I had that waiting period before I could get it. And so like the nuance of the build up to getting it was like, I've got to have that one. So we did get like maximum maple craze over that one for us, because we saw it and we're like, okay, I've got to get that. And so it took us a little bit just to get it going. So before we actually had that one in the collection, that was one that we anticipated, you know, wanting a lot. So
Yeah.
it was gratifying to finally get that one in the collection. I'm sure the collectors understand that, but
one that I deeply remember is that winter gold, because we got some signwood from Ed Shin,
yeah,
and we grafted it, and you know, me thinking, hey, this is gonna have a leaf like an Aoyagi or something, and then it leafs out with a Matsumori style leaf. I just remember remember how unique and different that was, and being like, huh, I haven't seen
Yeah.
a bark interest tree with that style of leaf before. It's just so unique.
Ed has a beautiful one of those in his garden. Shout out to Ed and Debbie Shin. Ed's visiting in the next few weeks. Maybe we can twist his arm into being in a video or a podcast. But Ed's been really gracious with us. We've gone back to his place since '09 and visiting that garden. If you haven't, check out his Facebook page. I think it's just Ed and Debbie Shin Garden on Facebook. But phenomenal collection of maples there in New Jersey. So definitely check that out if you just want to gawk and awe at how great his gardens are, because they're amazing. So it's definitely something you'd want to see.
Yeah, and that's one I deeply remember. But out of this grouping, this one's probably the smallest, the Winter Flame. Which would you think is the largest?
Gosh,
Probably
out of this group, probably the Winter Orange. Winter Orange a little more vigorous than some of these other. I mean, typically we list Gold Digger in that middle size range. I would say its growth is very comparable to the Beni Kawa and that medium kind of grouping of them. Winter Orange tends to be more on the growth rate side of Sengukaku, a little bit more vigorous, more in that like 15 to 18 foot kind of size range, in say like a 10-year period, so a little faster even than some of these other ones on the table.
Yeah.
You know, Winter Gold is misleading because it might not have the height, but that it does get the width to it. So
it's definitely probably the widest out of this group.
For perspective of height, for sure.
Yeah.
Winter Orange is one of the easiest ones to pair with anything else, just because it's so distinctly unique. I think if I were going with a container garden, like say out in front of a house, and I wanted two that matched, I'd go with the height comparison of the Gold Digger and the Beni Kawa, because those two are going to have a very similar growth rate, but very different bark interest. And also the pink in the spring gives you a little something
Different fall colors, too.
Yeah, they're gonna be interesting together, but line up a little differently in each season. But you can't go wrong with any of the pairings, especially with coral bark types, because each of them are going to look really interesting. You know, what you really want to do is have a red type and then pair some other colors with that. That's really the basic format to that kind of pairing.
So I want to throw a wrench in your system here, because when all of our conifer videos, we stop and we can say which one would pair best with a Japanese maple.
Yeah.
Let's throw this backwards and say, which one of these do you think would pair best in a conifer garden?
Well, there's a lot of different options there. I mean, obviously the smaller varieties pair well with smaller conifers, but if I'm just going for overall pairing, I like that Winter Orange for the conifer garden. You're not going to get a lot of that style color in a conifer garden, especially in the winter months. I mean, you put this in a deep evergreen setting, it's going to look electric. You know, the Gold Digger is going to do that too. I mean, either of those are probably going to be your most wow factor for that deep evergreen garden flash.
And on top of that, we've talked about this before, but when you give these a backdrop of an evergreen, that bark color flashes, and it really gives something special and something unique. And so they would all do fantastic in that setting.
Yeah, yeah.
But Winter Orange, I agree with you, is probably going to be the most flashy in that.
Most flashy. I would say the most commonly used for that would be the Beni Kawa. I mean, I think that's a classic addition to the conifer garden there. You'll see that in a lot of gardens, that bright red stemming. Really going to show out against any of that evergreen foliage too. So we've stole the producer here from behind the camera to answer a few questions for us as well. So Brian, were you growing any of these in your previous garden?
Yeah, I had a couple of these. I think I had the Verkade's Winter Gold, and I believe I actually had two Gold Diggers. I ordered one, then I forgot that I had ordered one, and I ordered a second one.
That happens with like 250 cultivars, I guess.
Which eventually became a gift to a friend of mine. So
that was nice.
That was really cool because he had one, I had one. We were both comparing. He had one out in sun. I had one more in shade, so it was kind of cool to compare those.
Yeah.
But the Verkade's Winter Gold was really cool. I believe too, at one time I got a winter orange, and you're right, that orange color is like nothing else in the garden. I mean, compared to the other winter interest, it's just something about that. You're like, wow, I've never seen that color before.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really cool. Hey, thanks for watching the Mr. Maple Show and our latest episode on winter interest maples, part 2.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you enjoyed this content, like, subscribe, and share. Sharing this channel is the greatest way for us to get our content out there for others. It's definitely how word of mouth works for our nursery, and how our nurseries continue to grow is our customers sharing it with others. So we greatly appreciate it when you share. Also, sign up for our weekly emails on MrMaple.com. You've heard us say it, but we add 10 new plants every single Tuesday at 10, so there's always something new and exciting coming to Mr. Maple. Now, if you see something here that's not currently on Mr. Maple, you can always get notified on our website. So say if you saw something really cool and your heart was really set on winter orange and you don't currently see it available at the time you're watching this video, just go to winter orange on MrMaple.com, put in your email, and we'll notify you as soon as we have it back in stock.
Have a great day.
And God bless.